Welcome, everyone. We'll start in a few minutes. Thanks for joining us. We'll get started shortly. Thanks, everyone. Nice to see everybody trickling in. Give folks a few minutes to come in. We'll get started shortly. Oh, wow. Hi, everyone. I don't know what just happened, but glad to be back. And I think it's about time that we get started. So thanks for your patience. We'll dive right in. All right, so we can bring our music down. Be great. Thank you so much. All right, everyone, welcome and thank you for joining us on the 2023 webinar, Puerto Rico, the Diaspora, the Island. I'm Sherilyn Seeley, Senior Program Manager for Grantmakers in the Arts. So before we begin our 75-minute webinar, please take a moment to review the Zoom feature so that you have an optimal experience with us today. And some more information about that is on your screen right now. If you would like your experience to include live captioning, you can select the closed caption or CC feature in the toolbar at the bottom of your screen and select show subtitles. If you have any questions for our tech team during the webinar, you can send them a message using the chat function. And otherwise, if you have questions for our presenters specifically, then you can use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen to submit questions, okay? And we'll have a Q&A at the very end of the presentation. So if you have questions throughout the presentation and you send them in, don't worry, we haven't forgotten you, but we'll get to them at the very end. So Puerto Rico is shaped by its people, environment, history, and geopolitics. The island has a complex colonial history and everlasting political situation, which defines its status as a U.S. territory. The diverse social and cultural narratives of the island are known well by natives to the island, but remain a mystery to most. A beautiful island that is so often perceived solely as a destination place is filled with opportunities that you'll hear about shortly for partnership, power exchange, and investment. But are there unique challenges and misconceptions about the island that mainland funders need to keep in mind before building partnerships on the island? How does disaster recovery play into this? So as we get into that conversation and discussion, I'm super glad to introduce Pam Breaux, President and CEO of the National Assembly of State Arts Agencies, Alexis Ortiz, Senior Program Associate of the Office of the President at the Mellon Foundation, and Carlos Rodriguez Silvestre, Executive Director at Flamboyant Foundation. And not only will they discuss general misconceptions about the island of Puerto Rico and its culture, but also how the nuances of the local philanthropic sector present a unique opportunity for investment. So we're super glad to have them joining us today as our presenters. And at the very end, as I said, I'll be joining to facilitate a Q&A. So with that, I will turn it over to our presenters. Welcome, Pam, Alexis, and Carlos. Pam, why don't you get us started?
I will. Thanks so much. And hi, everyone. It's great to be here with all of you. I'm also honored to be here with today's panel. And thanks so much, Sherilyn, for designing our discussion today. It's exciting that members of GIA are gathering to begin thinking about and begin learning about Puerto Rico. I'm on my learning journey as well. I'm early in that journey and delighted to be learning with our colleagues there. And so I'd like to begin today by sharing a little bit about NASA, what we do and how that connects us to Puerto Rico and to all the island jurisdictions. NASA is a national service organization. We are the national service organization for state and jurisdictional arts councils. That means that our membership is made up of 56 agencies. It includes all 50 states. It includes the DC Commission on the Arts and Humanities and all 5 island jurisdictions. So that's Puerto Rico, the Virgin Islands, Guam, American Samoa, and the Commonwealth of Northern Mariana Islands. So we serve and work to strengthen these 56 agencies, both collectively as well as individually. So when I say we serve the collective state arts agency family, we do so by representing them in Congress and with various federal agencies like the National Endowment for the Arts. We also provide research and learning services for all the folks who work and serve as commissioners at state arts agencies. When I say we serve them individually, as you might imagine, our work is customized to meet each agency's needs. So a customized approach is important to all 56, but it's of particular importance to the island jurisdictions where our colleagues move through their work really distinctly from the 50 states. And so in some ways, their work is similar to the states, but in other ways, they're quite distinct. And I'll share more about that soon. So as I work with our colleagues in Puerto Rico, I'm learning about the cultural abundance emanating from the island. I'm also learning about the importance of regional connection and national connection for them and for the other island jurisdictions. Our colleagues at the Institute of Puerto Rican Culture, I'll also refer to them as ICP. Our colleagues there are also, they're leading by example by sharing their work related to recovering from major disasters. So these ideas about connection and recovery work, they're just a couple of examples of why Puerto Rico is such an important convening space, I think, for GIA this fall, and happily for NASA, my agency, in the fall of 24. So we'll move forward. On this slide, you see some lovely and talented folks. Carlos Ruiz Cortez, Executive Director of the Institute of Puerto Rican Culture, ICP, and Teresa Colvin, Director of the Mid-Atlantic Arts. And I'll share my story of why this particular photograph is so important. Earlier in my tenure at NASA, and in consultation with Monica Okada Guzman of Guam, I embarked on a learning journey related to our agency's members in all of the island jurisdictions. Monica really inspired that journey for me. She also chaired the State Arts Agency on Guam, and she's a former NASA board member too. And so at her invitation, when I visited our members in the Pacific Island jurisdictions in 2018, I, of course, experienced rich, creative cultures, right? I witnessed our colleagues working directly with artists. I saw arts and creativity in action as really the heartbeat of community life. I saw our colleagues at those agencies really be laser focused on connecting contemporary and traditional artists to community, to marketplaces, and to opportunities to learn a living, to earn a living, right? And connecting to countries across the Pacific and beyond. And so as I visited, I engaged in conversations with folks on each island, and a recurring theme began to arise. That theme was around the need and the desire to be connected regionally, to feel less isolated, right? To really connect regionally, as well as a need for deeper connection and representation on the US mainland. You see, most of the island territories, 4 of the 5 of them at that time, were not affiliated with any sort of a formal region. And so their observations, what they told me, their interests in regional and national connection informed our thinking at NASA. So that's when our thinking turned toward action, right? Action in response to the voices that we heard. And so with them in mind, we convened a conversation of all of the US island jurisdictions, alongside all of the US regional arts organizations and the National Endowment for the Arts. The idea was to hear first from the jurisdictions and to explore opportunities. So our first conversation centered ISEPE and the island jurisdictions. This had to be first for us, centering them, centering their voices. And we were able to do that in person just before the pandemic. We began building relationships. In some cases, we were deepening relationships that existed. And so although the pandemic then forced us to continue that relationship building and those conversations in the virtual space, I'm pleased to share that our regional and jurisdictional colleagues and the NEA committed to moving that conversation and that journey forward. All of our colleagues, in fact, at the regionals demonstrated a real heartfelt desire to be part of the network that helps to connect jurisdictional arts agencies to new opportunities, both regionally and nationally. So I'm so appreciative of them for that. In particular, I'm appreciative of WESTAF, the Western Arts folks, led by Christian Gaines. Their team worked with the 3 Pacific Island territories to craft a partnership agreement that centers working with them. So those jurisdictions are now members of WESTAF, and resources for artists and arts organizations in American Samoa, in Northern Marianas, and Guam are now available to them. Just as important as those resources, though, they're now connected. These jurisdictions are now connected to a regional network. They are learning with partners within the region. And so their own networks have expanded greatly with this connection through WESTAF. And so now that story leads us to the slide you're now seeing. So here, Puerto Rico and Mid-Atlantic Arts celebrate the signing of their partnership agreement for Puerto Rico's entrance into the Mid-Atlantic regional family. And Puerto Rico, for my counting, for my math, Puerto Rico makes 56, because as of this signing, which took place in December, all US states and all jurisdictions now enjoy the benefits of regional participation and a regional network. So, continuing my learning from ISEPE and sister island jurisdictions, they really bring an abundance of creative and cultural gifts, certainly cultural wealth, to these partnerships and to the entire country. And where Puerto Rico is concerned, I know that the Mid-Atlantic region will benefit from greater connection, as will Puerto Rico. And in fact, as this MOU signing occurred in early December, Mid-Atlantic Arts had already publicly opened and begun promoting their grant opportunities to arts organizations in Puerto Rico. And it's great to see that part of the work now continue to move forward, and largely due to the leadership of these two great folks on the screen. So as I referenced earlier, the jurisdictions told us that, and they signaled to us in a lot of ways, that not only regional connection, but national connection was of evergreen importance to them, both federal and national generally. And so this slide shows Carlos and NEA Chair Maria Rosario Jackson together, because this national partnership is particularly powerful. Among other things, the NEA paves the way for productively employing federal arts resources for the island jurisdictions. So here's a couple of quick examples. A West Staff example and a Puerto Rico example. West Staff now serves as the official intermediary between the Pacific Island jurisdictions and the NEA. So West Staff's presence and their role as an intermediary is actually working to reduce barriers to Pacific Island agencies accessing art support, and NEA leadership paved the way to go there. For Puerto Rico, one of the best examples, I think, is evidenced through the NEA's service after the devastating hurricanes of 2017. The endowment's flexibility and even its detailing of federal staff onto the island was a steadying source for ISEPE and the arts in general, I believe, in Puerto Rico. And so responding to devastation, responding to these devastating hurricanes is also where the deep strength of Carlos and his team at ISEPE can easily be evidenced. The cultural agency was the first state agency issuing checks, right, to their constituents in Puerto Rico after the hurricanes, the first. And that was so critical for art stakeholders. Even more, even with a complete loss of electricity and so many downed trees and blocked roadways, as will happen after that kind of devastation, the ISEPE team still managed to provide communities with a sense of connection and comfort and normalcy by bringing artists and arts organizations to locations throughout the island to work with people. They leapt into action. They funded artists directly to serve communities. The lack of electricity wasn't their deterrent. In fact, it was something they just worked around. That's how ISEPE showed up for communities. First, they focused on getting artists to shelters. Then they realized more people were outside of shelters, and it was important to go directly into those communities too. And so that work then gave birth to their program, Cultura Rodante, taking artists to different areas of the island. And so what's beautiful work, first of all, but equally beautiful is this work began as a response to an emergency, and then it evolved into work that continues to evolve, because in physically going into more communities, ISEPE realized, their team realized, and they experienced, I believe, a broader constituency. And so now their commitment to serving more communities where they live continues to evolve as a part of their work. That is beautiful to see. You know, Puerto Rico, as I think I mentioned, is, I think, a beautiful place for some really important learning. I was privileged to spend a little time there in late November, receiving a firsthand glimpse of the arts and cultural gifts Puerto Ricans share with each other and then share with the world. I spent my first day there, a really full day, with Carlos and the ISEPE team. They organized a dynamic experience, and they were able to demonstrate to me how they and partner institutions lift up and empower the arts, specifically in service to communities. They showed me institutions that are physically still coming back from Hurricane Maria. And I emphasize the physical because the buildings themselves are still coming back. But the folks who program those buildings never stopped. never stopped serving the people. They never stopped creating opportunities for the arts to be of service and relevant to folks on the island. And certainly and necessarily after the hurricane, there were first responders, of course, saving lives. But not long after, the arts community served as second responders, affirming life and connecting community when people needed those life-affirming connections the most. As the team led me through a remarkable day, that's the team and more, team and partners that you're seeing on the screen. As the team led me through a remarkable day, they emphasized recovery and they emphasized opportunities to come, squarely focused on the future. I witnessed their commitment to community as staff members. Staff members shared new engagement strategies and really just shared their pride and their passion for the work, and witnessing that commitment and that energy was really exciting for me. I witnessed team members talk to me about and show me how they are working to expand the artistic canon, making Puerto Rico's national art collection better reflect artists, young and old, from all communities and all walks of life. And just as importantly, I witnessed their passion for art service, because every story they shared epitomized the energy and the engagement they employ in service to the people of the island. Incidentally, these folks, I'm really indebted to them, because I learned so much from them and continuing to, and I'm grateful for that. So this next slide features the lovely and talented Maria Del Mar Caragol. I'm sorry for my accent. I'm not a Spanish speaker, but Maria is an ISEPE team member, and she directs visual arts for the agency. She's an incredible arts worker and leader, and I'll add teacher, because she taught me so much about that work I mentioned, about the expansion of the artistic canon for Puerto Rico, bringing more artists into the limelight. And during the next couple of days, my next couple of days in Puerto Rico, I had the opportunity to visit artists, culture bearers, and smaller organizations as a part of the Grantmakers in the Arts Board of Directors meeting. And I couldn't have asked for better synergy during my visit, right? Starting with that institutional frame on the first day, and then the opportunity to move to that frame from artists and smaller organizations. It was amazing. And I couldn't have asked for better synergy. My conversations with individual artists and folks from organizations affirmed what I learned from Maria and the team at ISEPE. For example, a visit to Danielle Lynn Ramos' studio was, first of all, a soulful experience. He's an amazing person, an amazing artist. Danielle is an African Puerto Rican painter and sculptor, and he's been responding to the hurricanes and responding to the pandemic through his art. And he and I shared quite a moment when I told Danielle that I saw his work at ISEPE as a part of the national collection. He raised his hand to his heart and he said, inclusion in such an important collection and exhibit would not have been possible years ago. He and I spoke of ISEPE's work to expand the canon and include today's important artists from all walks of life. It meant so much to him that the government of Puerto Rico recognized his work at the highest levels, placing his sculpture not only in the national exhibit, but physically in a position of fundamental importance within the exhibit. His work is exhibited across from and in dialogue with the work of Jose Campeche, the country's first known and highly lauded Puerto Rican artist of the 18th century, the late 18th century. Campeche and Danielle Lynn Ramos are now in dialogue, their artwork in a physical way, as part of Puerto Rico's highly acclaimed artists from the 18th century and now to today. And so seeing that and experiencing Danielle's reaction to it was really moving. So expanding the canon is just one example of what it means to be a public funder of the arts in Puerto Rico, right? This snapshot of a news article highlights the legacy exhibit. That's the exhibit where Danielle is featured, Danielle and others. And of course, this is where the work to expand the canon is represented publicly. But ISEPE also engages in a great deal of work beyond the canon expansion. Certainly, they're providing financial support, direct financial support to artists, to organizations, to facilities, right? They're an arts funder. They're managing a host of cultural facilities. They're providing programs for the general public and the arts community. They convene the arts community. They manage archives, collections, and so much more. And here's part of what's distinct. In Puerto Rico and other island territories, I've seen the jurisdictional arts agencies work like local arts agencies, right? Particularly their programs. And they also work like state arts agencies, especially related to their policy work and funding. And they work like a national arts agency in some ways, particularly related to their partnerships beyond borders, across countries. And so it's really multifaceted work that public arts funders in Puerto Rico and the island territories do engage in. The work of the Public Arts Agency in Puerto Rico, again, it's and its sister island jurisdictions, it's distinct, it's often very complex, and it's always in response to the communities they serve. This slide demonstrates ISEPE's commitment to promoting convenings, and of course, conversations across the arts community, theirs and others, are critical for the field. So it's with great excitement that I anticipate being back in Puerto Rico. Its cultural, its artistic abundance is indeed profound. Getting together to learn, coming together as community, and experiencing a place that is so inspirational and instructive, I think will be a real gift for the GIA community. So it's one I'm looking forward to experiencing. So as a funder within our community, whether your scope is national or much smaller, I think we'll learn a lot together. Let's also acknowledge that Puerto Ricans live in every US state and DC as well. So connection to the island of Puerto Rico is invaluable, and I think it's instructive as we all serve Puerto Rican communities within our areas of service. So I look forward to being there. I look forward to listening to colleagues, connecting and learning. I also look forward to learning a great deal more right now, as I turn the virtual mic over to my fellow panelist, Carlos from Flamboyant.
Hi, Pam. Thank you for the invitation for this fall. Looking forward to it. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Carlos Rodriguez. I'm the Executive Director of Flamboyant in Puerto Rico. Flamboyant is a private family foundation who was founded in Puerto Rico in 2008. Right now, it has an office in Washington, D.C., and the one where it was founded in Puerto Rico. At Flamboyant, we believe that all children deserve the opportunity to live a fulfilling life, no matter the circumstances they were born into. In Washington, D.C., we do so by strengthening family engagement through school partnerships and leadership development, as we believe students do better when families and educators work together as equal partners. In Puerto Rico, our work is deeply committed to ensuring Puerto Rico is a thriving island economically, educationally, and culturally. Our work has been grounded in ensuring children are reading on grade level in Spanish by the end of third grade and be prepared for lifelong success. Our other programmatic area is called Revitalizing Puerto Rico. With that work, we create bridges to support public education and the arts in Puerto Rico, as we believe they are both key components in the revitalization of Puerto Rico. We believe in collaborations and are focused in the increase of resources destined to educational and cultural initiatives and in reinforcing the island's philanthropic sector's infrastructure. To strengthen the education and the arts sector in Puerto Rico, we partner with committed people in government, business, foundations, and nonprofits. In July 2018, we announced the creation of the Flamboyant Arts Fund. This endeavor was a perfect fit for our Revitalizing Puerto Rico efforts, as we consider arts and culture the soul of the island, and of any revitalization effort Puerto Rico should embed these two. As you know, the Flamboyant Arts Fund is a partnership between the Flamboyant Foundation, Lin-Manuel Miranda, his family, and the Hamilton Musical to preserve, amplify, and sustain the arts in Puerto Rico. The fund supports all facets of the arts community, including music, theater, visual arts, dance, literature, youth education, to ensure that the arts and culture continue to flourish during the rebuilding of Puerto Rico. Since its launch in 2019, the Arts Fund has already committed close to $15 million, providing multi-year unrestricted grants to over 100 arts and culture organizations that provide services around the island. These organizations are a pillar of the cultural heritage of Puerto Rico, and these grants have provided not only funding, but flexibility to ensure that they can continue producing art and connecting with their communities. At the same time, we have been able to reach over 600 individual artists that we have supported through other partners locally and in the mainland. We have also built and be part of over 10 successful and meaningful partnerships with national foundations that we will talk a little more about it later. The arts and culture sector in Puerto Rico is diverse, rich in history, and a living expression of the legacy of the ones before us and the promise of the new generations. The information that you see here is directly quoted from the Census of the Culture and Creative Work in Puerto Rico by the Centro Economía Creativa. This is data collected between 2020 and 2022, which can provide you with a brief ecosystem landscape of the arts and culture in Puerto Rico. As you can appreciate, in the last few years, inclusive artists and arts organizations in Puerto Rico have been in a precarious economic situation. Following a decade of financial crisis, substantial and consistent declines in government funding, and natural disasters such as the 2017 hurricanes, the 2020 earthquake, and of course, followed by the 2020-2023 COVID-19 pandemic. In addition, there have been traditionally few resources for arts organization in the island and few regular philanthropic funding sources. In terms of economic support from the public sector, the budget for the government in 2022 from Puerto Rico General Fund is a little over $10 billion. Only close to $15 million are destined towards public cultural agencies. It's the lowest it's been in 13 years, representing only 0.47% of the government's general budget. This does not reach the 1% even recommended by UNESCO. And as documented by Lab Cultural, since 2010, only twice has that budget almost reached 1% for cultural institutions, and that was back in 2012 and 2014. However, the impact of the arts and culture sector to the local economy is definitely significant. In 2017, it accounted for 2.1% of Puerto Rico's gross domestic product, and between 2010 and 2015, the sector contributed about $15 million to the public treasury alone. For Puerto Ricans, the arts are part of daily life, a tool to express ourselves, but it has also led us not only through the good times, but also the most challenging ones, becoming a source of healing and a lifeline, providing aid to those in moments of need and connecting communities in times of natural disaster and human-made crisis attempt to disconnect us. In 2020, Filantropía Puerto Rico, PSO organization here in the island, had work sessions with different sectors, including the arts and culture, to discuss the state of Puerto Rico from different perspectives. During this process, artists and cultural leaders identify some of the challenges that threaten the sector, like the abandonment of cultural aspects that are unrelated to creating art, lack of investigation and documentation about cultural history, and lack of recognition of culture as a right and independent resource. At the same time, have identified areas of opportunities to engage in advocacy work, provide additional support to administrative and operational infrastructure, and finding new creative collaborative ways to have access to alternate but steady sources of funding. Developing philanthropic partnerships in Puerto Rico has been an interesting and very fulfilling journey. It goes all the way from support to individual artists through organizations and partners like NALAC, Surf Plus, Beta Local, and MAC, directly supporting our strategies of each pillar, such as the Ford Foundation under support of our participatory grant making initiative Enfoco. It has also been in the shape of maximizing resources and impact through collaborating with municipalities and arts and culture state agencies like the Instituto de Cultura Puertorriqueña that Pam mentioned, ICP. It has also taken the shape of engaging with national donors as active thought partners in the reconceptualization of existing initiatives adapted to the Puerto Rico context, like the AIM program with Bloomberg and the DeVos Institute, to the design and co-creation of new initiatives like Letras Boricuas with the Mellon Foundation, and many others, and the co-support of strategic long-term support for the sector, like initiatives like Shared Services, Lab Cultural, and Maniobra. All of these initiatives have resulted from efforts in aligning funding programs or administrative function, adopting complementary strategies, sharing information and communicating about appropriate responses, investing in data, in research, in advocacy, merging funding for long-term investment, solidarity economy, trust-based philanthropy approaches, participatory grant-making models, diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility approaches. Definitely a lot of work yet to be done, but a path has been forged by the arts and cultural leaders, the philanthropic sector, and the individuals who believe that a strong artistic and cultural ecosystem is essential to having a strong and thriving Puerto Rico. As nonprofits, foundations, and grant makers, we must listen and learn to better identify the ways in which we can provide help and create a solid infrastructure so they can succeed. And I will now pass it on to my friend, Alexis Ortiz from Mellon Foundation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Carlos. Hello, everybody. It's so nice to see you all today. My name is Alexis Ortiz, and I use she, her pronouns. I am coming to you today from a conference room at the Mellon Foundation, which is located on the ancestral lands of the Lenape people on the island of Mannahatta. I pay my respects to their ancestors past, present, and future, many of whom are currently living in diaspora, and to the many other Indigenous people who live, work, and create in Lenapehoking, also known as New York City. And for a quick visual description, I'm a light-skinned Nuyorican Jewish woman with dark brown shoulder-length hair, and I'm sitting in front of a brown wood-paneled wall. So I have the pleasure of working in the president's office here at Mellon, where, among other things, I help to lead our work in Puerto Rico in partnership with our president, Elizabeth Alexander, her chief of staff and director of presidential initiatives, Julie Ehrlich, and our program and research assistant, Jack Fresquez. It's really a dream team. So today, I'm going to tell you a little bit about the why, the how, and the what of our Puerto Rico initiative. We support work across all 4 of Mellon's program areas, which include higher learning, public knowledge, and humanities in place. But today I'm going to focus on arts and culture. And I'd like to note that most of my slides feature images of artists' work, including this piece by Daniel Lindramus, who Pam also talked about. He's an incredible Afro-Puerto Rican artist from Loíza and also a 2021 MacArthur Genius. And I'll end the presentation with showing a quick video featuring some artist voices. And I say that just to say, this is a conversation about grant making, but ultimately our job as arts funders is really to build relationships with, listen to, and understand the needs of artists so that we can figure out how we can be most helpful in supporting them and the ecosystem. So why Puerto Rico? Puerto Rico is one of the first things that Elizabeth did when she came to the foundation to create this initiative. It was in 2018. It's a place that's really close to her heart and that she spent a lot of time over the course of her life. And this is actually a photo that she took on one of her trips there. It's also a place that has a lot of complexity and intersecting interests around the strategic priorities that Elizabeth was starting to set out for the foundation when she came back in 2018. And as the place that is on the front lines of so many of the collective challenges that we're facing in this moment, Puerto Rico really has critical insights for all of us to learn from about how we might engage with and work to resolve some of these challenges, especially through the arts, culture, and humanities. So, as you've heard, prior to Hurricane Maria, Puerto Rico had received very little funding from Mellon and from our peers. And even when funding had come in, it tended to be in the wake of emergencies and disasters. It tended to be episodic, and we know that that can be very destabilizing. I still often hear funders say, I don't know where to put Puerto Rico. It can be kind of considered too international. For some US-based funders, it can be considered too American for international funders. And so there's a real need to redress this historic disinvestment, particularly in the context of the numbers that Carlos just shared, as we've seen that much of the Puerto Rican government's historically robust support for arts and humanities has dried up in recent years due to financial austerity measures imposed by the Fiscal Control Board, also known as the Junta. Puerto Rico is also a central part of our mission at Mellon as a national arts and humanities funder that supports a fuller, more complex and multivocal telling of American histories and lived experiences and lifting up stories that have been undertold. So our understanding of who we are is incomplete if we don't understand the history and relationship between the US and Puerto Rico. And to do that requires us to resource Puerto Ricans to tell their own stories on their own terms. A big part of that history and stories is about displacement and migration. And I see this animation is not playing, but about 3 million Puerto Ricans live on the archipelago right now, and about 6 million live in the 50 states. And as Pam mentioned, we're across all 50 states. And this video, which I can drop the link in later, just talks about the top 10 states where Puerto Ricans are, and it really spans the entire country and Washington, D.C. The lines between communities in Puerto Rico and the diaspora can be quite fluid, with considerable movement back and forth, and many families have relatives in both places. There are also tensions, which have ebbed and flowed at different points in history, and which also seem to shift in the wake of Hurricane Maria, when cross-diasporic solidarity and support became such an important source of relief, as government failed so terribly at many levels. There's great internal diversity within these communities. Recent experiences like the hurricane, like the pandemic, have reinforced that there is not one singular Puerto Rican experience, but a multiplicity of realities, visions, and subcultures. Conceptions of and conversations around race, which are of great interest to us here at Mellon, are many and varied in Puerto Rico, and they're distinct from the conversations we're having here in the 50 states or among the diaspora. They're also evolving, as you can see here in this graphic, which shows the result of the 2020 census. You'll see the percentage of Puerto Ricans who identified as white plummeted from 76% in 2010 to just 17% in 2020. The percentage of respondents who identified as two or more races increased from just 3% in 2010 to about 50% in 2020. Meanwhile, the percentage of people who identified as Black remained relatively stagnant. Puerto Rico also recently commemorated the 150th anniversary of the abolition of slavery and is still living with and grappling with so many of its legacies. And there is a lot to say about this, and I'd be happy to direct you to some of the rich academic, artistic, cultural, and memory work that we've been supporting that really engages deeply with these issues. Finally, and perhaps most relevant to this conversation, Puerto Rico is really in the midst of a golden age of cultural and artistic production. I think, Puerto Rico has always had an outsized impact on culture globally and in the United States. I mean, you can look at Bad Bunny, who is the biggest artist in the world, about to, headline at Coachella, and he is just part of a broad ecosystem of incredible work that is and has been happening and really deserves to be resourced. And we're finally starting to see some long overdue recognition from cultural institutions in the US. Here I show a few recent and upcoming exhibitions, including one for Daniel Lind and one at the Whitney that's just about to close. There's also Forecast Forum at MCA Chicago and an upcoming 1898 show later this month at the National Portrait Gallery, among others. So with that somewhat long-winded explanation of why Puerto Rico, here are our goals of our Puerto Rico initiative. And I'm not going to read them word for word, but I would say the overarching goal has really been to shape a holistic initiative rooted in a deep and long-term commitment to this place, to address the urgent needs that we see in the present, to create opportunities so that folks who want to stay in Puerto Rico have the opportunity to do so, and to build sustainable infrastructure for the future, which very importantly includes relationships, bridges between the archipelago and the diaspora, and also networks of mutual aid and support. So now to the how of the work. As a national funder based in New York, we've approached Puerto Rico from a learning orientation. Elizabeth started with convening here at our offices in New York City in 2018, where she brought together dozens of artists and scholars and funders and other leaders from Puerto Rico and the diaspora. We've since taken many trips. We're actually headed down next week, very exciting. We get out to as many events and convenings and conversations as we can. We track a lot on social media, and we spend a lot of time on Zoom. Everything we've done in Puerto Rico has been in collaboration with wonderful partners like Carlos and his team at Flamboyant, through participating in Filantropia PR, which he referenced, which has really welcomed us with open arms and for which we are really grateful. We are keenly aware of the colonial dynamics at play and really try to be intentional and do our best not to replicate them. In 2019, we hosted an artist convening in partnership with Filantropia PR at the Museo de Arte Contemporáneo in San Juan, and you see a picture of this here. We're actually in a gallery space surrounded by paintings by the great master Antonio Martorell. And this is a conversation that continues to inform our work. It surfaced needs around organizational and professional development for artists and arts organizations, around the need for shared administrative services for the field, and real pressing needs around artist space, which continue to become more and more important as tax incentives have been luring American investors to Puerto Rico and have led to rampant real estate speculation and displacement. And I'll just say this convening also happened to coincide with the start of the protests that led to the resignation of the then governor, Ricky Rosselló, and it was an electric time to be in Puerto Rico with artists really at the front lines of the action. The Puerto Rico Initiative has also required us to rethink some of the ways that we work internally here at Mellon. I would say most crucially around language access. We've translated our guidelines and grant making materials into Spanish, and we have retained translators to be able to accept materials in Spanish that can be then disseminated to the staff in our other areas of the foundation. And this is a first for Mellon. It's definitely a work in progress, and so we're continuing to learn and iterate around that. Of course, the heart and the soul of the initiative is really the incredible work that we have the opportunity to support. So since 2018, we've made about 60 grants totaling a little more than $50 million across Mellon's program areas, with much more to come. In arts and culture, we support large, sort of relatively speaking, organizations like the museums, the Museo de Arte Contemporáneo that I mentioned, the Museo de Arte de Ponce, which you can see here in their conservation lab, and some of the stateside exhibitions that I referenced earlier. We also support independent artist-run spaces like Beto Local, Corredor Afro, La Goico, El Ancon. We support individual artists through partnerships. We support diaspora archipelago collaborations, including La Residencia partnership between the Abrams Art Center here in New York and Publica Espacio Cultural in Santurce. We support education programs like the Master of Arts in Cultural Management and Administration at the University of Puerto Rico. We support research initiatives, field-wide infrastructure, and the first ever Mellon support for a podcast, La Brega, which you see the cover art here, which has episodes in English and Spanish. It's in its second season right now that just wrapped up, which is looking at the history of Puerto Rico through song. And I highly recommend that you check that out. I'm not sure what's happening with the slides here. Something happened, but anyway, I recommend that you check it out if you're not yet familiar. I don't know if the slides will come back up, but I'll keep going. So one of the projects we're really most excited about that Carlos referenced is Letras Boricuas, which is a fellowship that we helped to shape in really close partnership with him and his team at Flamboyant. It's a first of its kind fellowship that's annually providing $25,000 to 20 writers across Puerto Rico and the diaspora across genres and career stages. We've worked intensively and collaboratively with Flamboyant and also with Jen Benka, who used to be the president of the Academy of American Poets, to design the program and the application review and selection process. And we've awarded 2 cohorts to date. We're thrilled that we'll be gathering with the cohorts and with the selection committee members and our friends from Flamboyant next week in Puerto Rico, and really look forward to learning more about the needs of writers and the artist community. And I know some of those folks are here in the room right now, so hello. And then last and certainly not least is another signature initiative. I'm just gonna go through these slides here. Just give me 1 second. So that's Letras Boricuas program. And last but certainly not least is the signature program, Maniobra, which we co-designed with Javier Hernandez and his team at the CEC that Carlos mentioned, and I know some of them are in the room too, so hello, along with a group of artist advisors. Javier facilitated the 2019 convening that I was talking about and has been a really close partner ever since, including on the cultural census that Carlos referenced and a shared services initiative co-funded by Mellon, Flamboyant, and Filantropía PR. Here's a picture of Las Nietas de Nono, which is a group of sisters who draw on their own autobiographical, familial, and community histories in their interdisciplinary work. And they've actually transformed their grandparents' home into a shared community arts and cultural space that is part of the program. So Maniobra is inspired by Creatives Rebuild New York, which is our New York State artist employment and guaranteed income program. Maniobra simultaneously supports individual artists and their own creative practices while also strengthening the ecosystem as a whole by providing salaries and benefits to 37 artists working at 25 of the leading independent arts organizations across Puerto Rico for a period of 3 years. Each organization is also receiving administrative and project support, as well as mentoring and other support from the CEC team. And a new Maniobra cohort, which is focused on the music sector, will be announced later this month. So I'll end by playing a video so you can hear directly from some of the Maniobra artists. Thank you so much for having me, and look forward to the Q&A and conversation.
Mi nombre es Juan Pablo Vizcaíno Cortijo, trabajo caretas de coco de Vejigante del pueblo Loíza.
Pues mi nombre es Rosenda Álvarez Faro, trabajo mural.
Mi nombre es Sonia Miñez Jiménez, soy artista visual y gestora cultural, y junto a Rosenda pues somos las codirectoras de Taller Malaquita.
Mi nombre es Nicole Cecilia Delgado, soy poeta y artista de libros y codirectora de La Impresora.
Mi nombre es Rubén Rolando y soy artista transdisciplinario y gestor cultural.
Al oído a esta sintonía revuelta, sonido radical que desde...
El proyecto Maniobra nos permite a nosotros como colectivo centrarnos más en continuar nuestra gesta de una forma mucho más cómoda a nivel pues, económico.
Maniobra llega a lo que es Taller Malaquita en un momento bien importante en que nos encontrábamos decidiendo si vamos a continuar o no el trabajo.
Bien, desde Maniobra podemos generar la sostenibilidad del proyecto de conservación del patrimonio histórico y cultural y también fomentar más conexión y vinculación con los ecosistemas de Manatí y de la cuenca hidrográfica del Río Grande de Manatí.
Yo pienso que el impacto que puede tener Maniobra en nuestros proyectos es permitirnos pensar un poco más a largo plazo, y el resolver asuntos que necesitamos resolver en el presente, pues yo creo que nos va a dar la oportunidad de ayudarnos a pensar como en el largo plazo y a dónde queremos realmente estar más adelante.
El proyecto Maniobra, pues entendemos que es un momento crucial, ya que pues, la clase artística en Puerto Rico llevamos años y años y años y años trabajando y pues no encontrando formas de remuneración por nuestros esfuerzos.
Trabajar con un sueldo justo que te permita poder vivir dignamente, poder desenvolverte. Yo creo que casi por primera vez tener un sueldo estable.
Es fabuloso, o sea, nos parece que debe continuar y repetirse para darle beneficio a otras personas.
Nos conecta natural. Dale oído, estamos en la misma sintonía. Dale oído, estamos en la sintonía revuelta. Dale oído.
Amazing. Thank you for that. I loved that video. And thank you all for your incredible presentations. That was fantastic. It was really exciting to hear about the intermediary kind of conversations that you've been having, Pam, as well as your personal experiences. Carlos, you sharing some of those statistics. And we'll kind of like dig more on that in a moment. And also, I appreciated you bringing into the conversation, Alexis, the conversations that are happening in Puerto Rico around race and how distinct they are from there versus in the 50 states. And so I loved that, and I'm excited to get into more. So if you have questions, I know some folks have already started adding it to the chat. Carlos has been going at it, answering questions, trying to get through some of them so we can get to everybody's. Thank you, Carlos. But keep the questions coming, and we'll get to as many as we can. A few folks have already asked if this will be recorded. It is being recorded. We'll send out the recording. We'll send out the slides, so no worries, but send your questions in, and we'll get started. So I'm actually going to start off with you, Pam, a question for you. So you mentioned that public funders, like the Institute of Puerto Rican Culture, I'm saying it in English, as you obviously just heard, but I know it's ICP, often fulfill a programmatic portfolio that goes beyond funding during times of great need. So can you expand on that specifically for Puerto Rico and the ICP?
Certainly, and I'll use the hurricanes as the example. Certainly, we saw ICP spring into action in a variety of ways. I think I mentioned one of those ways around, immediately being able to fund artists to do direct work with communities, facilitating them getting to shelters as well as in communities. Beyond that, ICP engaged in a whole host of very practical, tactical activities to respond, right? So another example would be how to support the artists who are doing this work at a time when there's power outages, across the island. Well, one way is to facilitate really practical things like getting potable water for artists and arts organizations. Over the course of time, facilitating getting washing machines. I mean, the practical, the tactical, experiencing what the needs are and being ready to address those needs. And then further down the road, a little further away from the actual disaster, setting up co-working spaces with internet, right, for folks to engage. So really just being very, very real and proximate to the needs of stakeholders is how I experienced their work unfolding after the hurricane.
That's great. Thank you for sharing that, Pam. I'm going to kick it over to you, Alexis. Two-part question here. So first part is coming from someone just listed this in our Q&A, interested in hearing more about language access and organizations being able to submit applications in Spanish. So if you could talk a little bit about that, and then dialing it back, if someone is starting to work in funding for the first time this week and wants to kind of hear a little bit like 101 didactic information, like how do they get started? Literally, what is the first step? That's kind of like follow-up. I think that you may go a little bit hand in hand. So if you could respond.
Yeah, absolutely. So like I said, Spanish language access is definitely a work in progress at the foundation, and we're learning as we go. We started with a pilot at the end of last year where we translated our guidelines for the presidential initiatives into Spanish and invited folks to submit their materials in Spanish. And now based on that, our grants management team is working to provide translations of every piece of the grant making experience from beginning to end. And so it's not quite ready yet, but it is coming in the next couple of months. And like I said, we also have retained translators on our end to be able to translate the materials, because when materials come in, the program staff reviews them, but they often have to go to our legal team and our finance team and other folks inside the foundation. And so we wanted to make sure that we were taking on that work ourselves and not requiring that of grantees. And so, we, like I said, it's a work in progress. We really welcome feedback and would love to be in conversation with folks who have more to share about that around best practices. In terms of 101, I mean, I think so much of this is based on relationships. And so I would say, there are networks. I think, Filantropia PR, which Carlos referenced, as did I think is a great place to start. It's a very welcoming community, and there are funders working across all sectors in Puerto Rico. And so I would say for me, that would be the first stop. Connect with me. You'll get my email, after this, after this webinar. I'm happy to talk to anyone about Puerto Rico any day. And I would imagine that Carlos and his team would as well. But I think, it's really not about reinventing the wheel. Like I said, the work is happening. It has been happening. And so really just to the extent possible, kind of plugging into things that are already going on without kind of coming in with any preconceived notions or trying to create something new from scratch, but really listening, understanding what the needs are, and kind of going from there. And so I also hope that when the conference happens in November in Puerto Rico, that there will be really great opportunities for that kind of connection and those kind of relationships to start to be built.
That's great. Thank you, Alexis. Perfect segue into my next question, because it is about the Puerto Rico conference. Side note for folks who are joining us, the Grantmakers in the Arts annual conference this year will be in Puerto Rico, November 5th through the 8th. So get excited. And so this question is for you, Carlos. So you obviously know all about the conference. You are one of our planning committee members. Woo! And you also are native to the island of Puerto Rico. You are also a funder. And so the question that I want to ask you, for folks who plan to come to the conference, and this isn't the first, opportunity to have this discussion, but as a funder and kind of being fully aware of conversations that happen on the mainland amongst funders versus in Puerto Rico amongst funders, what are some things that you think funders who are coming from the States to Puerto Rico should leave behind? Whether that's something concrete, whether that's mindsets, however you want to respond to the question, or leave behind or bring with them. So, yeah.
I mean, I think Pam mentioned some, she clarified for us some of the misconceptions that we might have, for example, in the role of what ICP could have in Puerto Rico. So that's one of them. So there are so many different examples. It's funny, but it's not really that funny. It's complex that for some things we are considered oftentimes part of the US, but for others not. And you can see that in different aspects of our daily lives, from the judiciary to the language, to the access to the mainland, to the mailing, through the cargo, through the treatment of Medicare, Social Security, and all of that. And likewise, there are specific examples for the arts and culture sectors, database-wise, right? How do we collect our data of the impact of the arts and culture in Puerto Rico? Where does that reside? Some people in the US might think, oh, they speak Spanish. I think they must be in some international Latin America database, but then the Latin America community or the international community say, no, they're territory of the US, they must be accounted for there. So oftentimes things like this just leave us in a limbo, and therefore, without one or the other. So there are many situations like that we hope that all of our panelists and the different sessions that we're going to be having can also engage all of you in those conversations. But I think that will be an interesting conversation. And I think as you get into Puerto Rico, be prepared to see how you experience similar but different culture in a territory of the US.
That's great. Thank you for that, Carlos. I appreciate that. And I appreciate you giving different examples as well for folks to wrap their heads around as we prepare for the conference. Very exciting. All right, so I'm going to take some more of our attendee questions. We have one from Gabby Strong, and the question reads, are there any intentional funding efforts in Puerto Rico that focus on Taino, Indigenous people and culture? And when can we consider wealth remitration within the context of philanthropy? Are there any intentional efforts to do so in that region? So that question is for anyone if you have a response.
Bueno, I mean, I'll just add on the question on the Taino indigenous people. I can just say there's a museum that supports that kind of work. But again, I don't know if this will be considered enough, definitely not. But there are dedicated spaces and attention to that in some of the museums that you actually have very near to where we'll be staying and hosting the AGI in the fall.
Awesome, thank you. All right, so for all of you, are there specific there goes the question. Okay. Are there specific programs to support traditional arts, artisanal crafts, or folk arts, either individual or organizations, through the panelist foundations or through ICP?
Bueno, I'm sure Alexis have more information, but on our behalf, the Letras Boricuas initiative that we have done with Melon, we have done it directly, Melon and us, and actually given that individual support to the writer. But besides that initiative, we have worked through partners to get to individual artists, art craftsmen, and some of those partners have been local, who have the capacity, the know-how, the reach, the grounding to reach those individuals like Museo de Arte Contemporáneo, El MAC, Beta Local, just to name a few. And we have also, as a result of the, of the national disasters, engaged in partnerships like with NALAC and Surf Plus that not only have the capacity and through people in Puerto Rico to reach the individual, but also offer a programming on top of that supports to individuals. But there are many examples of an initiative that are aimed towards that. But of course, it's always a challenge, right? Most of the limited funding that philanthropically has traditionally been placed in the arts and culture sector tends to obviously go more towards institutional organizations than to directly to individuals, and we recognize that.
That's great. Thank you, Carlos.
Add just a little to that.
Please,
Cheryl,
yeah.
although I don't have any data with me related to traditional artists, I can tell you that ICP has a significant investment in the direct funding of individual artists. About 34% of their grants are grants directly to individual artists. So it's one of their priority areas, one of the areas of commitment. And so although I don't have the data with me, I imagine that that includes contemporary as well as traditional artists. But that's a significant number for a percentage for any public agency in providing dollars directly to artists. We wish there were more dollars, but that's significant for the funding that exists.
Yeah, I was going to say ICP has specific initiatives around traditional artists, and I think they're also working on a project right now with CEC around supporting that ecosystem. And in terms of Melon, like Flamboyant, we work through partners and intermediaries to move resources to individual artists, and we define that expansively. And there is a lot of really interesting work happening around kind of rescuing and lifting up cultural forms from different places and different parts of Puerto Rico right now that we are very excited to be supporting. So we don't have specific initiatives at Melon, but it's something that we think about across all of the work that we're doing.
Okay, that's fantastic. Someone added a question into the chat. It's wonderful to see how you all are working to provide more resources into Puerto Rico's artistic communities. I'm hearing directly from Puerto Rican artists and arts leaders, and I've seen with my own eyes how disaster capitalism is currently displacing Puerto Ricans, leading to loss of homes and other physical spaces, income, etc. I heard briefly that there are efforts not to replicate a colonial dynamic. How? And how are we ensuring that these dollars are going to Puerto Ricans on the island, on the ground, and not to a third party or aid or support organizations that are US based? And you just talked about, you know, the different intermediaries who are working on the island, in the US, or on the main, you know, in the States. You gave kind of different examples throughout the presentation, but if you wanted to add on to anything, any one of you, feel free.
I mean, that will be a long lived challenge, right?
Of course. Yeah, absolutely.
I'll just mention one example. I mean, one of the things that, like you mentioned, right, what we said is the lack of administrative and operational capacity of arts and culture organization. And, you know, we've been working through initiatives, co-funded Melon Philanthropia, for example, and shared services to provide to artists and art and culture organization that support so that they do what they love and know how to do best. When it comes to natural disasters, you have to be very agile to actually, capitalize on benefits from, let's say, FEMA assistance and all of that. So we recently been investing in some advocacy component to, three things: just give access to knowledge, give the tools, and prep art and culture organizations with what they need for when this happens again. You can trigger it within the limited time window that organizations have to start the benefiting cycle from support like this, so that it not only ends in, bigger third parties organizations, where at the end of the day, when they come down to these smaller ones, it's the impact is diluted. So we're working, providing the capacity to those organizations, and also in advocacy to relax some of those terms directly with the federal government, so that not only arts and culture organization benefit, but also small to medium, which doesn't have the capacity, the human resource, and the agility to react to how this constraints are set. I don't know if that answers, just an example.
I think that was a very strong answer, Carlos.
Yeah, I'd love to add, if I may, because this is something that Carlos and I have also worked together on. I mean, I think this question is a huge question, and it's such an important kind of framing for the context of Puerto Rico. These things are happening. And I will say, Pam talked about it, Carlos talked about it. When, artists are always leaders in their communities, and especially in times of emergency. And I think we've seen that in Puerto Rico over and over again, particularly, not only in Maria, but also in the recent, Hurricane Fiona in the fall of last year. And we really see how these cultural spaces are hubs for the community. Like, people come there because they need to get fed, because they need to have their souls nourished. And so, in the wake of Hurricane Fiona, we made a round of about $14 million in grants to partners, focus on arts and humanities, and also moving beyond that, realizing and recognizing that, arts and humanities work can't happen if people don't have roofs over their heads and food in their stomachs. And I was just trying to look up the statistics, which I don't have right in front of me, but in any time of emergency and disaster capitalism, the amount of money that moves to organizations that are in the place where the thing happens is minuscule. I think it's somewhere between like 3 or 10%. So we were very cognizant of that, and we're able to work through the networks that I've shared about, in partnership with Carlos, in partnership with Filantropía PR, in partnership with a lot of organizations that are on the ground, that were then able to move the resources to the communities directly. And so I think it's really important, and I just am grateful to all of the folks that we're in community and in partnership with on the ground, to know that, we had the resources and they had the relationships, and know how to move it to where it was needed. And artists were really, really on the front lines of doing that work.
That's great. Thank you, Alexis. And I'm not sure if you've seen the chat, Pam, but Isepe is sending you a hug, which I think is so lovely. So we've got one more minute. And so I want to just open it up. If you have any final thoughts that you want to share with our attendees before we wrap up.
I'll just add to the most recent discussion. Certainly the intermediaries, I mentioned, the regional arts organizations, now that their programs are open to Puerto Rico and the other island territories, their work in the equitable grant making space, their commitment to grant making to communities of color is an opportunity to pay dividends for the island jurisdictions as well. We also see good attention to great attention to geographic diversity through ISEP's work. Most of their grants, I think about 54% on average of their grants go outside San Juan, right? So they're not focused only on the largest city, but they're doubly focused on grants across the island. So that's another way grant making equity is showing up.
That's great. Thanks, Pam. Alexis, Carlos, any last words?
No, I mean, just excited to answer any question, any interest, any approach to coming into Puerto Rico, work with us, collaborate with us, either after this webinar or when you're back here in November. Hope to see you all. Alexis.
Just what Carlos said. I know you'll get our emails after the presentation, but really excited to think about collaborating with all of you. So please do not hesitate to reach out.
That's great. Thank you, all three of you. On the final slide of the deck, which you will be receiving, you'll have the emails of our presenters. So you can, as they said, feel free to reach out to them if you have any direct questions or any follow-ups that you want to make with them. And so thank you again for all of your time, your presentations. They were incredible, very thorough. There is a survey link in the chat for all of our attendees. Please fill out the survey. Let us know what you thought of the presentation and any follow-up that you may want to see. And again, I'll send the recording and a PDF of the slides and follow-up. So you will have those. And if you have further questions, you can feel free to reach out to me, Sherilyn Seely, at sherilyn@girs.org. And outside of that, thank you so much for joining us. Have a great day. Bye, everyone.